Titanic Honor and Glory is a project that has taken a long time. After so many years of researching Titanic in an effort to rebuild her, we have sometimes circled around in areas of the ship. We'll discover something new months or years after we call a space complete, and then we'll have to go through the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. But that is all part of the journey as we research and build the Ship of Dreams. Now, our main research methods for the whole ship come directly from primary sources that are all pre-World War II. And of course, the wreck of Titanic herself, which wasn't found before the war, but technically is the ship itself, so that's pre-war, but anyway, when we create a room, we first review plans, photos, passenger accounts, auction catalogs, specification books, anything that can help us to figure out the furniture, design, moldings, colors, props, whatever might be in it. Often though, what we see of a space is incomplete, since the ships were photographed while not in use or finished. So we have to eventually fill out the spaces or finish them for Titanic's sailing in April 1912. This requires a lot of filling in the gaps with information from other ships. I've often related this to the DNA analogy from Jurassic Park, not any of the bad sequels. To create a dinosaur, in our case Titanic, we take the gaps in our knowledge, the missing DNA strands of the White Star and the liner Titanic, and fill it in with other ships like Cunard's Aquitania or Red Star's Belgian one. Then we get the closest Titanic possible, yet errors can and have happened in our process. These mistakes and errors that I'm going to mention aren't technically really mistakes, and I'm not just saying that to cover my rear end. Just like the errors in the past Titanic movies aren't really mistakes. Well, some of them anyway. After a period of time passes, new information comes to light that proves something we once believed as a fact is now technically inaccurate. Research, especially Titanic research, is an ever-evolving field. It isn't an exact science with measurements like chemistry, where at the end of the day we have data that is 100% definitive and final. And that is the beauty of digital projects like our video game and our deck plans that can have updates. Any changes down the line that we can implement and the player or viewer can choose to download, they can get the updates that way. But since it takes us so long to both create and research this ship, emphasis on create the ship, we've gone down this path of finding new information after already having to make choices regarding certain areas of Titanic again and again. We need to progress so our best educated guesses were done, again based on the evidence at the time, for the spaces and objects I'm going to tell you about. I want to make sure I mention who thought of the new stuff when possible, because in the Titanic world, accreditation is important, especially when discoveries are made, because everyone needs to discover everything first. But now, please enjoy this list of some changes you will have to wait for, while others we can provide a little preview of, compliments of either Jack or Geo. White corridors. Starting off on A deck with something that might sound rather bland to some. I've often joked that this ship is just generally 3 colors: red, black, and white. What shade of white? Well, that's up to debate. A debate that goes on forever. This change happened because Geo Castro, our talented modeler and researcher, who comes up with so many theories and ideas for how this ship looked that we often have to tell him to just calm down a little bit and step back. Geo was reading a letter written by first-class passenger Ramon Artargavedia to his brother Adolfo. Besides personal messages to his family, he remarkably wrote accurate descriptions of a couple of rooms aboard Titanic, including the first-class lounge and corridors. The corridors are painted white, and some rooms, like this one, are made of carved wood. Oak, I think, with green velvety satin sofas and chairs. Everything is new and rich. To Geo, Ramon would have just walked through the lounge corridor to get to the oak lounge, and it would have been fresh in his mind when he mentioned a white corridor. Indeed, Olympic would eventually paint many of her oak rooms white, as Mr. Thomas Andrews in 1912 wrote that the ship's public spaces were too dark, so several first-class oak spaces, including the D-deck boarding entrances, were painted white. These spaces we can confirm were white aboard Titanic thanks to the wreck footage taken in 2001. Titanic was also a rather dimly lit ship, with few light bulbs scattered in between here and there. So painting these rather dark oak spaces white would help to brighten up the room a little bit. So with all that, Can we take Ramon's words as fact and paint these lounge corridors white aboard Titanic? Well, if we continue in his letter, he properly measured the promenade, the dining saloon, other corridors. He noted how many waiters were in the saloon. He noted the number of elevators. He goes on and on. I can truly relate to his OCD. The bottom of the grand staircase. Areas of the ship that have never been photographed probably account for 90% of Olympic and 99% of Titanic. This is not an exaggeration. We haven't seen anything of Titanic and barely any of Olympic, and yet there's hundreds of photos of her. During her entire career, they just took photographs of the same areas all the time. I am so sick of seeing the same spot by the grand staircase on the port side. Get down the grand staircase, Douglas Fairbanks. So we've hardly seen any of this ship, never Titanic's grand staircase, and only bits and pieces of Olympic's. Bottom level of the staircase, E-deck, we can only guesstimate from deck plans, sketches, and catalogs. So our very first depiction is kind of moot. The evolution we have thought of comes from the mind of THG modeler and researcher Chris Daly, whose specialty isn't staircases, it's actually elevators and telephones. Back 700 years ago, we made the first Titanic Honor and Glory demo. We created something rather simple for the E-deck landing. But looking at everything now, the deck plans, iron plans of Olympic, sketches, catalogs, and even the railings from the ship, we've come to this different conclusion. The straight-angled staircase has gone away. It is replaced with something smaller, like this, with curved wrought iron coming down from D-deck, terminating in two newel posts like before. But it follows this one true, genuine representation we have of this area that comes from a cutaway drawing of what RMS Britannic was going to look like. It was made by an artist at Harlan Wolff, and the whole thing is pretty darn accurate, so there is no reason to believe that this was going to be inaccurate down here on E-deck. It even has the door to the key locker right there. So this redesigned staircase will match all the plans, the drawings, and in our opinion, it's just going to flow better down, down, down. The reinforcement of Scotland Road. One of the benefits of getting new information, such as the iron plans, which we didn't have originally when we started making this ship, is the joy of realizing everything is wrong. One such area was Scotland Road. Scotland Road is the long corridor on the port side of the ship, which stems from the bow all the way to the stern. Well, not really all the way, but it's a long distance of the ship. Now, this helps crew to get from one side to the other, and passengers in third class to get from the bow to the stern, and also to their dining saloon midships. Now, remember, like I said, back when this was created, we were using everything we had to our knowledge, and that included ROV footage of the actual corridor that was captured by James Cameron in 2001. But Olympic/Titanic's iron plans are able to illuminate this corridor much more than the wreck could. What we had created looked very appropriate for the time. But the very first big change was simple. Our wooden walls on either side of the corridor were going to switch to steel. This made sense when you looked closely. There were waterways with drains running on either side of the corridor. These were present for washing the wooden deck of Scotland Road. These walls wouldn't have been wood when there were waterways and a deck present. They would have been steel, which is shown on the iron plans. The next change came when we finally found some great examples of similar corridors on other ships. This terrific photograph of a cruise corridor down below comes from Belgian. She was built by Harlan Wolff, and I love calling her Titanic's second cousin once removed. Essentially, you were looking at Titanic Scotland Road, only smaller. This is what the space will look like when we get it in the engine and finish it. The lower portion will have a dado, a dark color like the well decks below with white above, because the corridor would get dirty with passengers, crew going back and forth, and you have storm rails at the halfway mark. Throw in some gates, move some lights around, and the space has totally changed. Now, it's going to take a lot of work in the engine, so it's going to take some time until you see it, and we're not positive it's going to be in Project 401. The piano in the D-deck reception room. We're moving it back to the starboard side because of reasons that are classified. Illuminating the dining room. And finally, this big one that I hope will make a lot of people angry and hate us. I'm sure this will be a surprise for many out there, but if anyone wants to blame someone, go ahead and blame Geo again for this one. But really, please check out Geo's work on his Patreon. He is a master at creating Titanic and ocean liner art. I think he's the best there is at creating a render of what it actually looked like to be aboard these ships in 3D with the full scene complete. He has quite a fine understanding on how Titanic might have appeared, but also how the Edwardian age functioned, something we don't really see, especially not yet in our empty THG demos. You can find his Patreon link below. It has long been accepted that Titanic did not have any table lamps in her first-class dining saloon, even though they're in every single Titanic movie. The evidence for any of them seemed to be zero. None are in the one photo of Titanic Saloon, and none have been spotted in the numerous photos of Olympic Saloon over the years. But now it's time to break that impervious theory with many little cracks, slowly but surely. First, let us examine deck plans and specification books. One little note that jumped out at us was in Britannic's specification book, and there was something on her deck plans that went along with this. You can see right here in this section which describes all of the lockers aboard the ship. Number 46, locker for saloon table lamps. 7 lockers with double doors, each with louver and fret. Now this is a locker which is down on F deck. You can see here that it corresponds to a number of lockers which are both on Olympic and Titanic's deck plans. Certainly there could be many different meanings for this. Perhaps this is where the gimbal lamps, the cabin lamps that were used in first class, were stored but not in use, as they were indeed very portable. Sometimes first class was called the cabin class or the saloon class, so maybe this was the saloon Oh, it's noted again as the table lamp lockers for the dining saloon. I guess it's the dining saloon table lamp lockers. Oh, I guess it's not for the gimbal lamps, it's for the dining saloon table lamp lockers. Oh, okay then. Interesting. But this is Britannic, you might say. This is a ship that was going to be upgraded to be the best of Titanic and Olympic. Okay, fair enough. That is a silly argument, but I will take it into consideration. Before I go to the physical evidence for lights, I want to briefly discuss the Edwardian way of dining and the service that was around it. I have recently finished watching Downton Abbey, so I'm clearly an expert on Edwardian table manners. Unlike all the movies you've ever watched that had dinners aboard Titanic, not every night was a super formal event with men wearing white tie and tails and ladies in the latest fashions of beautiful dressing gowns. Ships sailing across the Atlantic were much more relaxed, almost like vacations. Gentlemen and ladies were still dressed appropriately but casually for dinners aboard, unless it was a special event or occasion, which then calls for more fanfare and service to be set up at the tables. It takes a lot of work each night, actually between each meal, to prepare for these first-class passengers. Polished flat wore in, clean china switched, fresh linens, printed menus, flowers, and if it was perhaps an occasion or a holiday, table lamps. Just like how at home you wouldn't take out the fine silver and china every night, the table lamps wouldn't possibly be removed from their lockers unless called for by the chief steward and chef. And then, after the highlights and the events of the formal evening, they would be brought back down and locked away. Alright, that's a good theory, but why haven't they ever been seen? Well, they are seen in the earliest concept art for the room, and even the Ritz restaurant concept art. But again, not in photographs, that's true. That is because we've never truly seen the room in use while at sea during a voyage. These photos and this film are taken with models aboard posing for the camera, pretending to be enjoying a meal and voyage aboard Olympic. At most, they are doing this between service, or when it would take up the least time to interrupt the staff and fellow passengers. And this famous photograph of Titanic was taken during breakfast or lunch. Definitely not time for the table lamps to come out. Okay, all these theories are great, but the big question we have is, how did they plug in the lamps? That is a very good question. And you might think that is the flaw in the plan. Indeed, these are not lamps lit with candles nor oil, but they are electrical and hence have cords. As a matter of fact, you can see the exact same lamps that we suspect Titanic and Olympic had aboard another Harlan Wolff ship, Minnewaska. Many, and I do mean many, other ships of the age and period, including Aquitania, Adriatic, and famous others, had table lamps in first class, so there must be plugs. And they do seem to be on the floor. So if the plugs are on the floor, surely we should be able to spot 1 or 2 on Olympic, right? This is something. That one right there is directly under a table. Like, this is something that it seems to be protected by a garter. Something. There's another one over here. Oh my gosh. I spy with my little eye something that goes into the deck. Oh boy, there's one right there. Okay, so now we can't say for certainly what exactly these are, but they sure are in suspect spots to be plugs. Perhaps guards for electrical outlets, but they do vanish in later years, perhaps after the war and after refits. They maybe installed a better method to plug in the lamps, or they were just covered up as taste and etiquette quickly changes. But these odd round objects under many of Olympics tables cannot be ignored. And finally, there is a precedent for Olympic having electrical outlets low to the deck in her saloons and restaurants. It could be for lamps, it could be for hot plates to keep food and soups warm, or it could be for plugging a vacuum to clean the carpets. But they are present. We just know the restaurant would look certainly lovely with electric table lamps as well. So our changes are numerous, some small and trivial, some big and earth-shaking. To all our fellow researchers watching, you do not need to accept them. We are not the say-all, end-all when it comes to Titanic. Even on our own team, we many times do not come to an absolute agreement on certain matters. This is a team that will argue for days over the correct shade of white that was painted in first-class cabins. Titanic is a subject in which there is no true one expert, just everyone trying their best to figure out what they can with the limited knowledge afforded to us. Please tell us what else you might have seen in our demos that you believe are incorrect. History-wise, nothing graphically, because the historical stuff is my fault and I am looking to be the lightning rod of hate lately. And what you comment, you'll discover is something that we've already planned on changing. Or maybe we're all just crazy about perfection and we'll never know truly how Titanic looked. Please help me. The team at THG would like to thank all of our supporters on Patreon, especially the officers, for keeping us afloat and allowing us to continue working on all of our projects. You guys truly are letting us research, create, and rebuild Titanic bit by bit. You share the love we have for this great ship and all those who sailed aboard her. If you want to check out more, and perhaps consider joining the project or just supporting, you can click any of the links below. It's on our Patreon where you'll find a lot of information and everything else related to Titanic Honor and Glory.